On June 25, 1950, the first major conflict of the Cold War erupted on the Korean peninsula. The Cold War, which began in 1947, involved a plethora of countries but revolved around the rivalry of the United States, the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union's ally China. During the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union fought many proxy wars which took the place of outright conflict between the two countries. The Korean War was one such proxy war and was caused by a failed compromise between the Soviet Union and the United States. The compromise was doomed because of the two countries' deep mistrust in each other and that they could not control the people they put in power. Although Korea was an independent kingdom for over 500 years, it had been ruled as a Japanese colony from 1910 until the end of World War II. At the end of the war, the three Allied leaders, Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, and Joseph Stalin, met to discuss what to do with the world after the defeat of Germany and Japan. In this meeting, known as the Potsdam Conference, the leaders discussed how to reconstruct the European and Asian countries after the devastation of the war. Though with a lack of a common enemy and a lack of trust, the three leaders struggled to come to terms on how to reconstruct Europe and Asia. Regarding Korea, the initial plan was to occupy Korea with the United States south of the 38th parallel and the Soviet Union north of the 38th parallel. After the division of Korea, its Korean leaders wanted to go to war to unify the country. Both South Korean leader Syngman Rhee, supported by the United States, and Kim Il-sung, leader of North Korea and supported by the Soviet Union. They each wanted to go to war, but they lacked the weapons and financial strength to do that without the support of their superpower backers. Neither the Soviet Union nor United States would help either side go to war. The United States was worried a Korean conflict could lead to all-out war with the Soviet Union, while the Soviet Union didn't think Kim could conquer South Korea. North Korea invaded South Korea on a warm day on June 25, 1950 at 4 o'clock a.m. Tanks and troops crossed the 38th parallel along with a heavy artillery barrage. Both North and South Korea had an equal number of troops, about 95,000 soldiers, but the North Koreans had battle-hardened soldiers who fought in a previous civil war in China between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek. As the North Koreans advanced on the South Korean capital Seoul, the South Koreans panicked and blew up bridges to stop the North Koreans. Many citizens trapped on the wrong side of the river died alongside South Korean soldiers. The North Koreans claimed that their invasion of South Korea was in response to what they claimed to be a general attack from South Korea. The United States wasted no time in supporting South Korea. President Truman authorized blockades of North Korean ports using United States Navy Task Force 77, as well as dispatching the first United States troops and urging the United Nations to aid South Korea. Deciding to divide Korea was a bad compromise that only delayed the conflict instead of resolving it, and perhaps made the conflict even worse. There are three major reasons why the compromise failed. First, to have a good compromise, both sides must benefit from it. Each side must delve into the other person's perspective. If both sides let their egos blind them, then a good compromise can't be made. According to Harvard business professor John Baldoni, he goes on to state, "Our ego often prevents us from seeing what others see, and worse, prevents us from seeing the merits of their case. Strong-willed people often become so consumed by the power of their ideas that it prevents them from examining and understanding another's point of view. Start by understanding the other person's or group's point of view." The United States and Soviet Union were so fixated on their own ideas they couldn't see each other's perspective and create a good compromise that would benefit both of them. One of the reasons they couldn't see each other's viewpoint and the second reason why the compromise failed was that both sides distrusted each other. But what led the one-time allies to distrust each other? The Soviet leaders feared and distrusted the United States because they believed the United States deliberately delayed opening a second front in the war against Germany. Ever since the Soviet Union entered the war, they had requested that the United States open a second front. But the United States didn't open that second front until 1945. The Soviet Union believed the United States had waited to invade to make the Soviet Union weaker. After the war, the Soviet Union was struggling to recover and its people were suffering. Over 20 million civilians and military personnel died in World War II. The country had also spent almost 70% of their industrial output on helping the military, and their economy was severely damaged from this. They had also lost thousands of villages, towns, and factories due to the war. There was a shortage of food due to the lack of men and functioning equipment. The government was also focused on improving industry, not helping the citizens. As a result, many starved or were homeless. Another reason for distrust was when the United States developed the atomic bomb, the Soviets felt that they were left out of the production in order to keep the United States in a more powerful position. Their leaders feared that the Americans would use this weapon of mass destruction against them. The Soviet leaders also feared Western influence on its own population, believing the United States was encouraging Soviet citizens to turn away from communism. They feared their people would revolt to embrace the material benefits of a capitalist Western lifestyle. Instead, the Soviet leaders believed that the world should be under communist influence. The United States, on the other hand, was afraid of the ever-expanding Red Zone, the zone controlled by the Soviet Union and other communist countries. The United States knew that the Soviet Union's goal was to spread communism to all corners of the globe. This goal directly threatened the United States, so its leaders mistrusted and feared the Soviets and their intentions. This fear started in 1919 after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and increased after World War II with the Soviets gaining the atomic bomb and the Chinese communists coming to power in that country. U.S. leaders feared that unless communism was contained, it would pose a threat to them. During this time, anti-communist propaganda was also appearing in the United States, terrifying its population. The general public was behind their leaders in distrusting the Soviet Union's influence in their country and abroad. The third and final reason the compromise failed was because the two Korean leaders believed that they should rule the entire country and were willing to fight to achieve their dreams. Before the official war broke out, each side conducted fierce guerrilla attacks across the 38th parallel. Even though the Soviet Union and the United States supplied their respective countries with supplies, they had no control over what the leaders decided to do with the equipment. In the wake of the failed compromise, there were many consequences. Many cities and towns were destroyed, as well as many civilians killed. Both sides suffered heavy losses. North Korean losses totaled to 600,000 dead or missing civilians, 406,000 military personnel killed, and 1,500,000 military wounded. South Korea suffered 1 million civilians dead or missing, and 217,000 military personnel killed, and 429,000 military wounded. The United States suffered 36,568 casualties and 103,204 wounded, while the United Nations Command lost 3,063 military personnel and 11,817 wounded. In January 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower became president, but the most crucial change was the death of Joseph Stalin, who was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who agreed with the United States that there should be a ceasefire. The peace talks began again, and on July 27, 1953, General William Harrison Jr., representing the United Nations, and Nam Tu from the Korean People's Army, signed an armistice that paused a war that is technically still continuing to this day. The armistice, which reinstated the compromise, has caused many disputes over territory, and there are questions if the armistice is still valid. Since the armistice, there has been a Cold War between North and South Korea. They have threatened each other but never followed up on those threats. The demilitarized zone, the area that separates North and South Korea, is heavily protected. There are troops on it day and night. The relationship between North Korea and South Korea, as well as the United States, has been tense. The United States added North Korea to a list of rogue states and deemed North Korea to be a threat to world security, and repeatedly warned North Korea that they would not permit the development of their nuclear weapons program. However, the North Koreans again didn't listen to a world power and developed nuclear capability. Though the armistice was a compromise that ended a war, it has caused many disputes and can be considered a failure. But why did the second compromise fail? Because Korea was not unified and no true peace brokered, relations between North and South Korea and its ally, the United States, have been troubled. The situation could have been different, however, if at Potsdam or at Panmunjom, the United States and Soviet Union could have come to an agreement on what economic system to install in Korea, rather than dividing the country in two. The United States and Soviet Union could have called upon the United Nations diplomats to solve the dispute. Then maybe Korea could have remained unified. However, they chose a compromise that divided the country in two. The compromise, which was created to sustain peace and avert war, failed. The mistrust that lurked in the background between the United States and Soviet Union, which was great in Potsdam and even greater in Panmunjom, did not improve the compromise. In fact, it was a major reason why it failed. When two countries try to compromise, they will fail unless they trust each other. The Soviet Union and the United States were too focused on their own vision of what Korea should be, and they didn't think to see if the other country's idea had merit. There was such a deep distrust between the two countries that they could not come to a compromise which would benefit both of them. Even if there was trust between the two countries, the compromise still would have failed because the United States and Soviet Union could not control the leaders that they put in place in Korea. The Koreans were ready to fight tooth and nail to unify the country under their rule and were not going to back down. If only the United States and Soviet Union had compromised over how to keep Korea unified and worked with Korea, the years of turmoil and destruction could have been avoided. Many civilians and soldiers lost their lives in what could be called a pointless war. Along with the people who lost their lives, the bitter disputes and arguments that flood the news today could have been avoided. All of these things happened because of the failure of two compromises.